Wonderful. Well, happy to have all of you here. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, today's subject is a little dark. We're going to talk. We talked about joy last week. So this week we're going to talk about sadness. That's sort of the way it goes. And I've brought together a couple of interesting texts, and we'll sort of unpack them together. I'll say that sadness or sort of that layer, those layers of emotions do show up in the Talmud in a variety of different places. And I think that they're very much deep in particular contexts that are sort of not as broadly applicable as we might hope. So I tried to take texts that we could draw from that were sort of more broad. There's an interesting story, which we're not going to look today, about someone who was sad because they misunderstood some sort of thing and they didn't do an action that they should have done. It's like, okay, it was sort of in the weeds and it's not particularly helpful for us. So I want to, just like with every other text, it's not a sort of be all end all understanding of a particular emotion in the Talmud, but really a cherry picked set of selections. So let's jump in here. Let me try I've got the right sheet. Okay, here we go. Can everybody see this little sheet? Give me a thumbs up if the answer is yes. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
It is a little small.
It is a small. Okay, I will make it bigger. That's not a problem. We can do that. We live in the future, as I like to say. How's that? Is that better? Yeah, much better. Okay, fantastic. Let's just jump in, and then we'll unpack it. We'll unpack it together. The only thing of context I want to give for our first text here is it's talking about the book of Eicha, Lamentations, and starts with a quote from it. Now, I want to be really clear that the book of Lamentations is a very emotional text, and it deals with very serious subjects about violence and violence towards women, and uses them both in very literary ways and metaphorical ways. And while we're not going to talk about that very much, it's sort of unavoidable when you talk about the Book of Lamentations. And then there's an interesting thing at the end of the story that I really, really don't like. We'll get to it when we get to it, but it's sort of in a similar vein. And we'll unpack it as the case may be. So can I get a volunteer to begin and read our first paragraph here? Yeah, Tybal, please. Jackie, was that you raising your hand? I can get you on the next one. All right, you're muted, but I'll get you on the next one. Tybal, please.
The Gemara returns to its interpretation of verses in Lamentations. She surely cries. These two cries, indicated by duplicated verb, why are they written? Rabbi says that Rabbi Yochanan says one is a cry over the destruction of the first temple, and one is over the second temple, which was to be destroyed.
Great. All right. Pause for a sec. All right. So the Gemara is sort of in the book of Sanhedrin, and the tractate of Sanhedrin is sort of interpreting verses from Lamentation. Sometimes we'll see in the Talmud a series of verses, and we'll sort of go verse by verse and do interpretations. There's some great stuff around Purim like that, where they'll go sort of verse by verse interpreting the biblical texts. And so here we have a quote: "She surely cries at night," and the phrasing in Hebrew is "bacho tivke," which means, like, if we take these two words together, they both come from the same root, which is to cry. And so I've translated here as "she surely cries," because in English we don't really have the phrasing to really reflect that doubling. It's sort of really emphasized. And because the rabbis, when they see a doubling like this, they're like, spidey senses go off, and they're like, oh, this is an opportunity for us to do some interpretations. And here we get one of them. Why is there two crying here? Bacho tivke. As Tybal read for us, Rabbi Yochanan says one of them represents the crying over the first temple, and the second one is over the second temple, which was to be destroyed. It hadn't been destroyed in the timeline of the Book of Lamentations. Typo, keep going. Let's read another paragraph.
May I ask a question before I read?
Yes, please.
Is the she Sisera's mother?
I don't think so. This is the very beginning, so I don't think it's a named person. I think it's
because I know, but I'm not remember. I know Sisera's mother is how we learn the shofar cries, but I also thought for Elul, but I thought there was a connection to Tisha B'Av, but it's not coming back. So I wondered where we started.
It's a good question. I don't think that's what's here, exactly what's happening here, but I'll admit that Book of Lamentations is not my strongest part of the literature, so I could be wrong, certainly.
Well, it's Talmud on, I mean, it's either Talmud on Lamentations or it's Eicha Rabbah. I mean, it's not obviously Torah. Anyway, or Tanakh in this case. Sorry, Tanakh. Okay. The term at night indicates that the crying is over matters of night, as it is stated regarding the response of the Jewish people to the report of the spies after they returned from Canaan. And all the congregation lifted up their voice, and the people cried that night, Bamidbar 14:1.
Great. All right, I'm going to pause you there. So here we've got this verse, a couple of words really, and really just 3 words. Bachotiv ke balayla. She surely cries at night. And so we're starting to unpack, okay, what do each of these words hint towards or invite us to understand? So Rabbi Yochanan says you have the 2 temples, right? Again, is anachronistic, right? It's not really saying that. The rabbis are adding a layer onto it. The second sort of imagined connection being made here is that the at night gives us an association to think about other things that people might cry at night. And here we make an association to a story. And the story is when the spies came back, or the scouts came back from Canaan, they the 10 of the 12 of them gave a bad report, and the people sort of responded in kind. And when did that happen according to the book of Numbers? At night. So now we're making sort of an association. Before we get into the rest of this, how do people feel about these associations, about the temple and about the spies? Does that feel resonant? When you think of sadness, are these things that call out to you? We're about to talk about Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, so that makes sense. There's certainly an emotional element to that. Yeah, David.
So yeah, on one level, it does, because these are traditionally sad things that changed Judaism upside down. A lot of people incidentally also died, which we read about, and in Lamentations we read about a lot of very sad things. So at that level, yeah. At another level, it seems like tenuous connection that they're making on purpose, which is fine. I mean, obviously, certainly Lamentations itself is about at least the destruction of the first temple, so it's not completely tenuous. But I guess the rabbis have a way of taking a single verse and then reading a bunch into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what the rabbis are doing here is giving us analogies and associations so that we can sort of stack them up in our head and hold them all at the same time. But certainly the relationship to the spies in Canaan coming back on their report is tenuous, I think is a great description of the association they're making. I mean, yes, nighttime is referenced in both, but so is it mentioned in Goodnight Moon, and I don't think that would be a great association here. So, tenuous, I think, is fair.
Yeah, and the deliverance from Pharaoh happened at night, and that would be a happy thing at night. So maybe not entirely happy because the Egyptians had to suffer, but nobody would use that as an example of something sad, and it happened at night. So
yeah, there's definitely some fluidity or openness being offered here. Absolutely. Any other thoughts before we sort of keep going? we're going to read ahead. We're going to read one more paragraph, and then the Gemara is going to give us a bunch of alternatives. When the rabbis say, and the language here, I'm going to skip this paragraph for a moment, but we are going to read it. When we get to the word alternatively, the language is devar acher, which means an alternative, another thing. And usually when the rabbis, happens in Rashi, it happens in the Talmud, it happens in other places, when they say devar acher, it usually means that they're unsatisfied with one of the explanations that they've given, and they're trying to give up a bunch of different answers. When you give a bunch of different answers, it means none of them are particularly a perfect fit. That also invites us into an interesting opportunity of holding lots of different things at the same time that all hold a piece of the truth. And I think that's pretty cool. Can I get another volunteer? Thank you, Tab. Jackie, are you still open to reading? You're muted, so I can't hear you. Ooh.
Is that better?
Perfect. Can you read it, Jackie? I know you're on your phone.
Yeah.
Right here.
Make it larger.
Let's see what I can do. I don't want to make it too large. How's that?
That's better. I can make it somewhat large too. Let's see. Alternatively, the term.
One paragraph above that.
Oh, Rabbi says that Rabbi Yochanan says that day that they heard the spies' report was the evening of the 9th of Av. The Holy One, blessed be God, said to the Jewish people, "You cried an unwanted cry, and so I will establish for you a reason to cry for all generations."
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Let's pause there for a second. So we got the first half of the spies. We had this sort of tenuous connection. So how do we sort of pull this all together? Well, if we imagine that the spies' report is happening at night, and that night is Tisha B'Av, the same night the temple is destroyed, the same story that Lamentations is telling us, we have now a much more solid connection, roughly speaking, right? And then we have this really, I think, uncomfortable dynamic being described here about God. We talked about God in lots of interesting ways throughout our learning this last few weeks. This one, maybe not so much. What is God doing here? God says, you cried when you didn't have a reason to, with the spies scenario, so I'm going to give you a real reason. That is not language I think is particularly healthy. Yeah, please, Jackie.
It's nasty.
It's really nasty.
It sounds like an angry parent with a recalcitrant child.
Yeah, I actually was going to use the language that's much closer to an abusive dynamic, right? Which is you don't have you've done something, it's not legitimate. I'm going to give you a legitimate reason. Cheryl, were you going to say something? Please.
Yeah, it takes me right back to my childhood when my dad would say, "I'll give you something to cry about."
Yep, that's exactly what I said.
Yeah, I'll speak. Just speaking for myself, I'm uncomfortable by this. We talked about God as a source of kindness and as a model for us. This is not a good model, not a healthy one.
So let's try to give them alternatives.
Let's get some alternatives. Exactly what I was going to say. Go for it.
Alternatively, the term "at night" indicates that with regard to anyone who cries at night, their voice is heard due to the ambient silence. Alternatively, the term "at night" indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, the stars and the constellations cry with them. Alternatively, the term "at night" indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, one...
You come up here. Can you see that?
No.
I can finish it for you. Sorry. So it says, alternatively, the term "at night" indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, one who hears their voice is touched by their suffering and cries with them. So here we'll unpack these alternatives, which, as as we see this sort of challenging text, I sort of thank God for these alternatives, or pardon the pun, I suppose. So one alternative is, instead of being at night, referring to the Tisha B'Av or the spies. We have when anyone cries at night, because it is quiet, people will hear them. They can be heard, right? Gives us a sense of community and relationship. Second alternative, at night indicates that anyone who cries at night, the stars and the constellations cry with them. It's not just that you cry and the universe hears you. And third, when you cry at night means that anyone who cries at night, anyone who hears them is going to empathize.
They'll be moved by that.
Yeah. Let's pause there because we're going to get to the last little bit of this story in a second. What do people think about these alternatives, individually or all together?
Well, certainly kinder than the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. Maddie, please. And then Dave.
I mean, I think it's beautiful to say that the stars and the constellations cry with them, that like us as human beings are part of this universe, that we experience all of the range of emotions. And it's, for me, it's like, it's okay to cry. It's definitely a difficult feeling, like I thought about recently what emotions sit well with me, what don't. Sadness, I'm learning to sit with it and to be with it. And this is a good text example that I actually might take and use other places. To say that it's okay to cry because we're part of this big universe, and people are crying with us for the good, for the bad, whatever, we're crying.
David and then Helena.
So for me, I'm kind of viewing it as a sort of a poetic or a literary way of expressing that the meaning of crying at night could be deeper than just crying, or maybe even crying during the day. And it sort of starts with the simplest, least poetic, if you will. Well, crying at night is heard because it's generally quiet at night, as opposed to you'll be drowned out by the traffic of the day or what have you. And then it builds up to the whole universe, as you said, the stars and the constellations, and culminates with this kind of anyone who cries at night touches those who hear it and they suffer with them. I think that's kind of an intentional literary formulation that I think is kind of neat.
Yeah, I love that. Helena.
So I look at it from a different point of view. During the day, you are busy doing all kinds of other things and mundane, and you work, you do other things. But at night, you feel lonely and you cry. So it's a different way of looking at it. If you have problems, that's where they come out,
Because you have time to cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that certainly at night is when all of the thoughts I've been holding off during the day finally arrive, when I'm sitting there staring at the ceiling.
Yeah.
I want to add another sort of analogy or metaphor, which I wasn't thinking of until we were talking about it. In storytelling, there's often a part of the story called Dark Night of the Soul. It happens right at the end of Act 2 in many stories. It's where the character hits their lowest point before they go and charge into the castle or whatever, right? In some sense, that moment is the night here, right? It could get better. We don't know, whatever challenge we're experiencing, it's like we're right in the middle of it. We're crying over the biggest challenge or whatever that challenge is. And for me, that also is a moment here, is not just maybe the physical, literally at night, but sort of even that metaphorical darkness that we experience. It's in that moment when we cry. I don't know. I'm just adding it to our list of possibilities. Any other thoughts? Let's read this last story. There was an incident involving one woman, the neighbor of Rabban Gamliel, whose son died, and she would cry over his death at night. Rabban Gamliel heard her voice and cried with her until his eyelashes fell out. The next day, his students noticed that he had been crying, and they removed the woman from his neighborhood so that Rabban Gamliel could sleep. So I want to say two things. One is the non-bold here is Rabbi Steinsaltz. So the Gemara doesn't say that. It just says she was taken out of the neighborhood. The second thing I want to point out is that for the most part, the voices in the Talmud are men talking to men. And I don't want it to negate any part of the story. I didn't want to change any of it before I brought it to you, but I think it's an important piece of context that the students or Rabban Gamliel are not this woman, and most of the people writing Talmud were not women who were experiencing this. Not that men can't lose children as well by any means, but
why not console the woman?
I'm sorry.
Why not offer consolation for the woman?
Yeah, so I mean, let's. I was going to open it up to what people think about this story. Right. So the students missed an opportunity to do the right thing and engage this person in their sorrow, as opposed to removing her. Other thoughts, reflections? What do people think of this story? It's kind of intense.
Where she should be with people who care about her and try to make her feel better. Instead, they isolate her.
Yeah, I mean, Rabban Gamliel doesn't, but certainly the students do. Yeah, David.
So in some ways, this seems to be another one of these stories about Rabban Gamliel that involve somebody, that sometimes it's him, but in this case, it's the students deciding to do something severe in order to make sure that the study hall operates at its highest possible level, or maybe the Sanhedrin operates at its highest possible level, even if that means that a suffering person has to be removed. And that's pretty hard. And we know some of what happens with Rabban Gamliel from other sources, maybe being that hard. In this case, the students, maybe they're actually missing the point. I don't know what comes after this story or whether there's more to it, but this is very hard.
Yeah, the Gemara tends to, it sort of goes in a different direction. The story doesn't continue past this. This little vignette is the entirety of this story. But yes, you're right. We're engaged with Rabban Gamliel's emotional state, like we were in the first week of our class, and there's a sort of big response in that previous story. He receives a dream that to make him feel better, even though we learn it's not remotely true. Here, the students are taking this person and removing her from the neighborhood for ostensibly his sake. It's not clear, right? That's not obvious. That's not in the text. That's Rabbi Steinsaltz. It's not wrong. It's not necessarily that way. I'm also struck by the imagery that Rabban Gamliel cries with her until his eyelashes fall out. That's a really powerful imagery. Other thoughts? Yeah, Maddie.
My first thought is thinking about empathy and the capacity that a person has to be empathetic. And for me, the ending is, to me, an extreme example of the fact that at some point the person who's helping can no longer help, or at some point it's damaging them, and it's okay to be sad. And when is it? This is me maybe completely going off in a direction because I have a bias, but maybe it was no longer serving him, and maybe the students were trying to do well by him. There was it's an extreme example to take her out of the neighborhood, but maybe more of an example of taking the person out of that space so that that person who was helping can fill their cup again, so that they can come back and help later. Because you can't constantly be in a state of helping some folks. That is the case, but then it becomes difficult to care for the person at the same capacity all the time.
Right. So I'm going to pull apart what I heard you say and see if you'll tell me if I got it wrong. On one level, right, we have Rabban Gamliel as caregiver, right, who is helping take care of his neighbor in a very, very difficult time, to a point where he's also experiencing damage. In this case, his eyelashes are falling out, right? He is internalizing or experiencing some part of it, and it's hard for him. And I think is a really important way of looking at this text. Rabban Gamliel deserves to be taken care of too, and here his students are doing that so that he can, as you put it, I think very nicely, refill his cup so that he can caregive somebody else, or he's a human being who needs help too, and that perhaps she's getting support from somewhere else. So, right, instead of understanding it as Rabbi Steinsaltz did, as Rabban Gamliel could get sleep, so that she could get the support that she really needs, right? This is the commentary. So we could fill in the blank here in a lot of different ways. And so Rabban Gamliel might be part of it, where he needs to be okay too. It's not just her, but him as well. I think that's did I get your take right, Maddie? Yeah, okay. So I think that's really important also, right? It's not just her, it's not just him. They both need support of different kinds.
Alternatively, if he's actually providing support to her by crying along with her to the point that is, to such an extreme that his eyelashes are falling out, for whatever reason, if he was actually crying with her and not just at the same time nearby, his support is now withheld from her.
Yeah, so we're going to go to Ron in a sec, but here's the language in the Gemara itself, right? So Rabban Gamliel Shama heard her voice and cried kenegda, right? So neged is like across from or corresponding to. It's not clear whether or not they're in the same place or not. They could be. He could be sitting across the room. We just don't know, right? This word neged is also, right, another association people have is we talk about the two first people as you have the first human and the ezer kenegdo, their helping partner, the person who is opposite of them. So neged definitely has a proximity understanding to it, but not exclusively so. Odd until his eyelashes fell out. Ron.
I'm not sure that some of this wasn't already said, but I want to give the students credit. I want to defend the students in that they may have moved her from the neighborhood. That doesn't mean they isolated her. They took her to a different neighborhood where her environment was different, and so she could recover more easily. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, we don't know exactly where she went or what she was doing.
I wanted to bring that up because David said isolate her. No, they didn't necessarily isolate her.
Yeah,
it may have been for the good of both parties, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's really important. There's certain pieces of that have come up already, but not said the way you just said it. I think the way I had read it first, when I first read it, was in that sense that we were isolating her. But I think as we've sort of discussed as a group, it's not the only way to look at it. And it could be that they helped her move to be next to her family who is in the neighborhood over. We just don't know. So I think exactly right, Ron. There's a way to read it on their behalf and against their behalf. And we should be able to, both of those have and something what to hold. If we look at this whole section altogether, anything call out to you? Any particular ideas that not just the Rabban Gamliel story, but thinking about this encounter as a whole, about the concept of night? Anything else that jump out to you, or do you guys want to move on? Yeah, Jackie.
I keep wondering how many students are involved. Could some of them stay with the woman, and some of them be with Rabban Gamliel?
Absolutely.
Maybe stick around so that they consolation.
It's certainly possible to read the story and add that information. We could do a midrash on the midrash, if you will.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we could read it that way. Let's move on. The other texts are not as narrative, I think, as this one per se, not as rich as this one. So I wanted to start here. But I think the other ones are interesting as well. If I leave it like this, can you see it? As opposed to me, I don't want to like reveal each one before it's time. Okay, great. Can I get a volunteer to read this text from Tani? This one's sort of also narrative, but very different.
I can read it.
Please.
So one Shabbat evening, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa saw that his daughter was sad. He said to her, "My daughter, why are you sad?" She said to him, "I confused a vessel of vinegar for a vessel of oil, and I lit the Shabbat lamp with vinegar. Soon the lamp will be extinguished and we will be left in the dark." He said to her, "My daughter, what are you concerned about? The one who said to the oil that it should burn can say to the vinegar that it should burn." Atana taught that lamp burned continuously the entire day until they brought from it light for Havdalah.
This is a very different kind of story about sadness. We have I think, generally an adorable story about a parent and a child, and one of them has made a mistake. The child has made a mistake and has lit the Shabbat candles with not oil, but vinegar. Which I imagine being very stinky. I'm not sure exactly how this would happen, but imagining that it did, right? And what does this parent say to the child? Don't worry about it. If God could make oil light all of Shabbat, so God could make vinegar do it too. And then we have like this sort of like addition, this add-on. The story really ends there. That's it. That's the story ends. We actually get an additional layer of the Tana, of the Mishnaic layer, the Baraita, to come and tell us that it lasted for Shabbat. In fact, it's really interesting because the first half of the story is in Aramaic, which means it's actually later than this Baraita, because the Baraita is in Hebrew. So we have this interesting thing happening where the Gemara, the rabbis of the Talmud, have edited these two things to tell us a story about this parent and child encounter. What do people think? Can we at least agree it's adorable? Yes? Okay.
It's a sweet story.
It's a sweet story. Why? Let's unpack it a little. Why do we think the daughter in this story is sad? Is it just that she made a mistake?
She wanted to do the right thing, and she missed.
She missed the mark. Yeah,
right.
Sometimes we miss the mark. Sometimes we intend to do something and we don't do it. Certainly, my own example, I'll just give a very silly one this week. I went to the grocery store. My wife had asked for a couple of yogurts, and I got one of each of the flavors. She says, "Well, there was a sale. Why didn't you get more of them?" Right? I was like, "Well, you only put one thing down. I didn't think to add more. I missed the mark a little bit. It's not such a big deal, but I missed the mark."
I think it's possible to sort of expand on that, and maybe I've just done so many foolish things that it hits me more. But sometimes one does something. I'm trying to think of a specific example, and it's not coming to me. But once you've done it, you say to yourself, "Oh, that was terrible." Or like, for example, let's say it's right before Shabbat and I'm running around because I got home a little later than I intended to, and I'm setting the table and I break a dish. It's not exactly the same thing as we're not going to have light because I screwed up with vinegar, but you just feel bad. It's like, I should have come home earlier to give myself enough time to not have to do that. I knew I should have been home earlier, and now I've broken a dish. And maybe it's Debbie's favorite dish to make it even worse. Probably not. I just made that up. But I think she's just feeling so bad that she messed up in the way that all of us probably have had that kind of feeling at some point. And I think what's kind of instructive about this and what makes it sweet is that you could say, if somebody breaks the dish or uses vinegar, you're right, you're a fool, you messed up, that's terrible. Or you could say, like this rabbi is saying, you know what, it's not the worst thing. I still love you, I'm still supporting you, and and not only that, God could, you're so upset, God could make your mistake not a mistake.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah, a power of intent here on top of a layer at the top of this. Yeah, thank you, David. I think that when we talk about sadness, and certainly we sort of on some level talk about the sort of the existential, the one we just talked about with Rabban Gamliel, this woman, where real loss has happened. It's tragic. It's painful. It's robust. Some of the stuff we talked about last week too. This is a different kind of sadness. This is it was a bummer layer of sadness. It's not that it's not sadness. It's frustration. It's missing the mark. We potentially are not going to be able, we're going to have to sit in the dark for Shabbat. It's going to be a real bummer. And we really get instead a story of understanding and empathy, and especially where you have a real evidence that this has been edited together on some level, potentially. The Gemara really, really wants us to know that not only did it be okay, like not only is it okay for some stuff like this to happen, but it actually happened even better than it could have. It lasted a whole day. It's not normally going to last a whole day. It's going to last all the way until the next night. Let's read ahead with this next story. This shifts gears a little bit, less to the sort of personal story, but really thinking about sadness in a more sort of collective way. Potentially, we'll see. We'll see what people feel that way. Can I get a volunteer to read this text from Tani? Yeah, Maddie, please.
5a, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Tani. I meant 5a. Yes.
And with regard to that generation, the verse says, "They who sow in tears shall reap with songs of joy. Though he goes on his way weeping, who bears the measure of seed, he shall come home with joy, bearing his sheaves." Psalms 126.
Right, and just as a side note, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, which is this is you might recognize the Hebrew if you don't recognize the English. Zorim bedima berina iksoru haloch yelech uvacho nose meshech hazara, and then it says v'gomer, etc. Right, this is part of, we recite this before Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, that part that's added for Shabbat and for holidays and for other things. This is that psalm, or part of that psalm is what's being recited here. So again, this is something that would be in common routine for many of the people, certainly in the Talmud. So when they're seeing this language, this is part of regularity. Yeah, please, Maddie, continue.
The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the expression, "Though he goes on his way weeping, who bears the measure of seed"? Rabbi Yehuda said, an ox, when it plowed at that time, it went on its way weeping and lamenting its labor, and yet upon its return through the same furrow, it was able to eat the young shoots, chazis, wherever that is, of crops that had already sprouted from the furrow. And this is the meaning of the phrase, "He shall come home with songs of joy."
Right. So here, what does it mean for to go on one's way weeping and bearing a measure of seed? We imagine ourselves as the ox, plowing, struggling, suffering, and weeping as a result of it. But as a result of that labor, there's nourishment to be found. I think we have to be really careful when we talk about suffering. So I want to be really careful about the way we talk about it. But certainly this is one narrative of suffering, which is you're going to get the fruits of your labor at the end of it. And it's going to have a positive ending. What do people think about this metaphor, this verse? Have you heard it? Have you reflected on this before? Have you heard this kind of idea?
Yeah.
Helena, tell me what you think.
So when you labor and it's hard and you lament maybe, why always me? Why am I working so hard? But then when you come to the fruit and bring it out, then you can be happy that all the hard work that went into it, it's נושא פרי עכשיו. You harvest it. You can rejoice with the result of what it brought to you.
Yeah. I think yes, I love that. Yes, we don't always know what the result is going to be, but certainly we're going to get something out of it. Yeah, thank you, Helena. Ron.
We have an example of this every week. We cook and we clean and whatever we do, and then all of a sudden we have Shabbat. So we're moaning about all the work, and then we have the joy of Shabbos. And to make it even more so, Pesach, same thing.
Yeah, I love even making this more regular and weekly, like on a much smaller scale, right? Which is we even use the word labor during the week, and we have a result, an outcome that we get to enjoy, which is Shabbat. Now, the only piece I want to sort of tweak, and it's not what you mean, Ron. I'm adding this totally, which is that that Shabbat is not something we have to earn. It's not it's not a result of our labor. It exists, and we benefit from it, and we experience it regardless of our labor. But I do think that the metaphor, the rhythm of it, is still valuable to us. So again, I'm not negating anything you said, Ron. I was going to say something else, but now I can't remember what it was. Any other thoughts? I'll speak personally. One other layer of this for me is that the language in both the verse and at the end is Rena. Rena is this joyous song. It's certainly the name of my daughter. We named her in part not because of this verse, but verses like this one, which is that joy and song, it comes from inside. It bursts out of us, and even if it could be challenging, even in the journey before then. And so I think there's something really powerful of recognizing that that emotions are temporary, that sadness is temporary, joy is temporary. It's not that it's bad that it's temporary. It's part of its nature. It comes and it goes, and we experience it. We go through it. We may experience lots of things at the same time, and then we will experience something else, whatever that might look like. And I think that's another piece of this, which is like the emotional journey is something that is constantly happening and continuing. My theme for 57 or for 2024 in my head is forward, and so like to me, I'm thinking about how we move forward through emotions. Even if you experience the same emotion twice, it's not backwards; it's forward into a new one. And so to me, that's something that's calling out to me. Yeah, Tybal.
Is that the baby that was born when after you started your association with B'nai Yeshurun?
Yes.
I'm sorry that I didn't remember if you only have one child, but
I have only one child. Yes, it's all good.
Got it.
Yeah. All right, with our last 15 minutes or so, let's look at the last story. And we talked over the course of the last few weeks, we used a lot of examples around making God our comparison of being like God, or being like God in a particular way. One of the example we talked about was around God's anger, that it lasts only for a fraction of a moment. A 16th of a second, I think, is what we had landed on. In other places, we say, God, because God clothes the naked, we clothe the naked. Because God does X, we do X. And so here we're also going to get a comparison. And one of the things that the rabbis do is they make the analogy using the language of flesh and blood people do X, but God is not like that. God does Y. And that's the framework that we're going to get here. Cheryl, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, I can read when you're ready.
Oh, I would love for you to read. Right, we're going to read this Psakim text right here, where it says, "Come and see."
Come and see how the characteristics of the Holy One, blessed be God, are unlike the characteristics of flesh and blood. When a flesh and blood person is conquered, they are sad. However, when the Holy One, blessed be God, is conquered, God rejoices. As it is stated, therefore God said that God would destroy them, had not Moses, God's chosen, stood before God in the breach to turn back God's wrath, lest God should destroy them. Psalms 106. In this verse, Moses is God's chosen, although he defeated God, as it were, by preventing God from destroying the Jewish people.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. So a couple of important notes. First, conquered is a very interesting translation here, one that I wouldn't necessarily, I guess I could have changed it, but I didn't. And it's minat chin, sort of be victorious. So again, I want to sort of just add that as a layer here. It's not that conquered is wrong, but I probably would translate this something around be victorious. And this story, right, Psalms is sort of replicating, it's telling a story about some other time in the Torah. What was the other time in the Torah? When God wanted to destroy the Israelites with the golden calf and the whole thing, and Moses convinces God to not do that. There was some violence. We sort of can keep that to the side for our point, but it could have been a lot worse. And so here, that I think is the story that's being told. That's the allusion in this verse from Psalms, is telling that story. So what is happening when a person experiences someone else being victorious against them? They're sad, right? If you're playing a game and your opponent wins, you're sad about it, right? Even like, I like to play games. I don't mind losing, but I mind a little, right? Like, everybody's a little sad when you lose the game, yeah, a little bit. But not God. What does God do when we are victorious against God? God rejoices. Yeah, Tybal.
So that's an allusion to the really famous, the God laughing in the Talmud, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me.
Right. So another association we can make is from the story of the oven of Aknai, which is a story that every conservative rabbi loves to talk about. I've certainly taught it with B'nai Yeshurun. I'm sure you've heard it in other places. But if you haven't, I will give you the very top level headline summary, which is rabbis are disagreeing over a halakhic issue. One rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, is academically, intellectually, objectively right, but all of the other rabbis disagree. And again, there's a big debate. There's rivers moving and trees uprooting, and how the Beit Midrash is falling apart. There's a sort of dramatic moment, and they call out to God, and God says, or the Bat Kol, the sort of voice of God comes out and says, "No, Rabbi Eliezer's right." And the rest of the rabbis say to God, "This is none of your business. This is human business. Stay out of it." And the response to that is what Tybal said, right? God says, "My children have defeated me," right? And effectively rejoices, laughs, and has this emotional response as well. So Tybal, thank you so much. That's the headline version of that story. Tybal, yes, what did you want to add, please?
And I just wanted to add, because isn't Maddie another Pittsburgher native? So maybe Maddie, who put Hebrew in the chat, will know what the Aramaic verb is, because I don't remember.
For which, sorry?
My children have defeated me.
The Aramaic. No.
Yeah, I don't know.
Didn't you just put Hebrew in the chat?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I did put Hebrew in the chat related to Natseach, because
but I assumed that meant a very high level of Hebrew and Aramaic literacy. Plus, the Pittsburgher thing.
Plus the Pittsburgher thing. Yes, I have studied modern Hebrew a lot, and I'm working on my Aramaic, as I've told Rabbi as well.
Yeah, we can look up the text, whether or not it is a parallel. I'm doing it here on my phone, whether or not it's exactly the same language or not. But even still, regardless if it's exactly the same language, we certainly have the same emotional component, which is God is happy when we defeat God. Now, again, there's probably an interesting dynamic here where if we've done something wrong, defeating God might look different. We might use a different word for defeating God. So here it's where we've proven God wrong. We've made God be better than God could have been or would have been without us. So that's, I think, an important dynamic. What are we learning about sadness here, since that's our subject in this text? Yeah, Jackie.
There are degrees.
Say more.
Depending on the nature of the reason that has enough strength to elicit sadness, some things are much deeper, whereas other things are things that can be ameliorated by somebody saying the right thing to you, and kind of the way that father was, while recognizing the little flaw that the little girl with the vinegar got into, but it's not the same as somebody losing a child to death. There's a finality about death that the vinegar can be replaced, and so can the oil.
Right. This helps us create a sort of maybe a middle space between the two extremes that we've identified.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. What else? Any other thoughts?
When I'm thinking of the ox plowing and the work that the ox is performing, the ox does eat some, but others benefit from the labor of the ox, those who perhaps didn't do the work themselves.
Yeah. That we might, again, I want to be careful around suffering. We might suffer for the benefit of others, even if they don't know that we've done it, or we share that joy or the benefits with those others. I also think that there's a piece here where a real honesty around what the rabbis are telling us, like it's human nature to be sad when you've lost. Like a not necessarily lost like a family person, one, but like a loss at being defeated. There's like a real human deep depth about how humans really respond to things that's being highlighted here. Yeah, David.
So I'm not sure this is different. By the way, I turned off the video not to be antisocial, but because I had to plug in my laptop or I was going to drop out suddenly, and where I have it plugged in is not worth anybody seeing, so to speak. So I'm not sure this is that different, but in the sort of with the idea that we the sort of imitation of God idea, I think maybe part of what it's also saying is we have that as our nature. It more or less says that a person who's conquered is sad, but we can aspire to rise above that. And, maybe the sadness then could be more transitory and you could end up getting to a better place. And God is giving us an example of doing that. So in that sense, getting back to what Jackie said, maybe that's God as a parent teaching us children something about behavior and how you might feel.
Yeah, I mean, the analogy or the metaphor being used as a God as parent is one that's very common, right? Avinu Malkeinu, God, our parent, our sovereign. Here too, right? That perhaps we want our children to defeat us, as it were. My grandfather, who had just about a 6th grade education before he had to start working, and immigrated to the United States, blah, 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 whatever. He used to say to me all the time, they always make them better, which was his shorthand for every generation does the work, that effort to make the next generation better. And in some ways, that's sort of what we're hearing also, right? We want the people we care about, the people who we've trained or taught or raised or supported to win, right? Maybe not defeat us per se, but to win, to accomplish their goal. So just sort of pulling out what you said there, David. So sort of by way of conclusion of our learning today on sadness, we talked about the range, sort of different emotional intensities of sadness. We used this analogy, this verse from Lamentations, to sort of give us a lens in which we can start to talk about empathy, how sadness is human and potentially temporary, or tremendously deep, and we get this really challenging, wonderful, complex story of Rabbi Gamliel again in the sense that we're starting to see stories of him a lot, and this encounter of his tremendous shared sadness for a person who had a very serious and significant loss. And then we had a much lighter story around Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa and his daughter, and this unfortunate circumstance where she lit a vinegar Shabbat candle instead of an oil one, and like not only did it turn out just okay, it turned out better than okay, and that we can sort of be empathetic in a different way, that we can hold the different layer of sadness. And here we talked in our last two texts about the labor we put in, that sometimes it's challenging or saddening to experience something and also know that there's some good that might come at the end. And lastly, that there's something about God that relishes in our victory, even when sometimes the challenge we have to experience makes us sad. We know that God wants us to defeat God, or at least by analogy. And I think if I were to sort of draw a single takeaway, and Helena, I see you, and I'll come to you at the end, is that, first of all, once again, it's okay to feel things. It's normal to feel things. And two, that there's a power in doing this in community, in relationship. There's, with the exception of the ox, almost all of our stories are stories of people together, more than one person together in relationship. And I think one of the things that the Gemara is continuing to guide us towards is doing that emoting, not just by ourselves in a quiet room, although there's a time and a place for that too, but to know that we are doing so in community, that we can be there and support each other through those potentially challenging moments, but also the good ones. Helena, please give us our last word here.
Yeah, what strikes me is the difference between certain things with the achzariyut almost. How do you say achzariyut?
Cruelty.
The cruelty of God. Oh, you cried for no reason, then I'll give you a reason to cry. Okay, so that's from one hand. And then from the other hand, the niceness from the father towards his daughter, that he said, don't be sad, everything will be okay. And the ultimate at the end, where God is happy when people are victorious over him. So it's like totally different, two different polarities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Extremes, two extremes.
Yeah, we're getting, I mean, even the whole series, but certainly even just today, we're getting a real complex look at the character of God in the Talmud, right, being a thin slice of what the divine may in fact be, and I think you're right. I wonder, without an answer, I'm going to ask a question I don't have an answer to. I wonder what Rabbah and Rabbi Yochanan experienced such that they would say this, their own lived experience, where maybe they are feeling a particular pain and are attributing it to God appropriately. I'm not saying it's wrong, but like appropriately feeling that. And Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa has a very different relationship and a different set of experiences, different community, what have you. I don't know the answer because I don't know them, but I also think that so much of our own spiritual experience is dependent on our own past experiences and what we're open to. And if we're only open to a cruel God, we are more likely to experience one. And if we're open to a God that understands and desires our victory over God, again, victory over God being a really complex subject all by itself, we might experience God in a different way. But I think once again, that returns us back of the deeply personal relationship we have with feelings and emotions, the deeply personal lived experiences that inform our emotions and our experiences. And we talked about sadness today, and we talked about joy last week, and each of them have a place. We have what to be learned from all of them. And so I'll leave it at that. As Tybal changed her image, it's just about Rosh Chodesh. So happy new month, our first of our 2 Adars this year. And I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your week and Shabbat and weekend. And we will see you next week. And we will talk about a different emotion then. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.